just first of all, a brief word about Our Scottish Future. You're going to hear a good deal more about it this evening, and the fact that you're here means obviously you already do know something about it. Our Scottish Future was founded just a couple of years ago at the instance of Gordon Brown, and we exist to make the positive and the progressive case for Scotland remaining in the UK, indeed for a better Scotland in a better UK, getting beyond, we hope, the endless and rather sterile yes-no debate which we've been locked into for far too long. We're having an impact. We know that already. The very fact that so many of you are here and so many others have expressed an interest makes that, I think, very clear. But we want to make more of an impact, and events like this are part of how we are going to do that. This evening, we'll be listening to Gordon later. Before then, I will introduce one of our very bright and lively young colleagues, Susie Murning, and Susie will be telling you about her interest and her commitment to Our Scottish Future and to the argument we're making. After that, my colleague Heather McGregor will introduce Gordon, who, as you know, is one of the great political figures of the age, and his intellectual and ethical commitment to politics is something which has been a great beacon to us as we struggle to decide what to do next. After Gordon speaks, there will be a scope for questions, which Heather will manage. And then you'll hear a little bit more from our Chief Executive, Henry Stannard, about what you can do next and how you can help us and what we can learn from you. So I'm going to hand over now to Susie Murning. Susie is, as I say, one of our very bright, very lively young researchers. And Susie is going to tell you what attracted her and what she does for Our Scottish Future. So Susie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks everyone for coming. It's so great to see so many people here tonight. My name is Susie Murning and I work for Our Scottish Future. And I'm going to share with you, as Jim said, a bit about why I got involved in the organisation. So given I'm working for the champion of the union, Gordon Brown, it might be surprising that I actually voted yes. So I saw the Yes campaign as something that offered the possibility of change. And I was thoroughly of the belief that staying in the union couldn't possibly offer the change that I believed our society needed. And I also really struggled to understand how anyone could care about issues like poverty in the way that I do and not vote for something that I saw as the most expedient route to tackling those issues. So I came to a kind of unconscious conclusion that it was only people who voted yes who shared my values. There was only people who voted yes who believed strongly in justice and compassion and in a fairer society and who wanted change. My journey from yes to no began when I joined the Labour Party, and I came to see through the friendships that I made there that I was completely wrong. We shared the same values in a very deep and meaningful way, and I came to see that that was actually true for the vast majority of people in Scotland. And it's because of these shared values that we all want to see the same thing. We all want our society to do better and to be better. And when I did finally set aside my dogma for a moment, what became apparent to me was that my core values are values that can in fact be served in this movement, within the movement against independence, just as much as I felt they could be within the pro-independence movement. But I also turned inwards and realised that there are some values, like the value of cooperation, that the Yes movement actually can't accommodate. I realised that if I did care about poverty so much, why was I so willing to abandon communities across the UK who experience poverty just the same as communities here in Scotland? But there are a lot of people who, like me, haven't always felt like the movement for staying in the union represents them, because there often isn't enough oxygen given to this fact, not enough attention placed on what unites us, and on the fact that we all want to see our society reformed, our NHS properly funded, our environment protected, and poverty and inequality properly tackled. And this is because the debate has been fueled by animosity and division. So that's why I got involved in Our Scottish Future, because I believe what Gordon believes and what the rest of the team at Our Scottish Future believes, that we've been offered a false choice. We've been presented with a false division. We don't need to choose between either no change unionism or no compromise nationalism. Gordon believes, and I'm sure everyone here tonight believes, that we can do better than this choice. that we can build a campaign for Scotland remaining in the UK that we can proudly get behind, one that reflects our shared values and, importantly, advances our desire for progress. His vision is for us to unite around values that we share, like justice and equality, cooperation and solidarity, because, as he says, it's not a border that divides the UK, it's the scandal of child poverty and inequality of opportunity. So I hope my story about my journey from yes to no illustrates to you why the existence of our Scottish future is so important. And I'm now going to pass over to Professor Heather McGregor, who's going to chair the event. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much indeed, Susie, and I never tire of hearing stories about how people have been on their personal journeys, and it was very inspiring listening to you this evening. I am sure we will all be very inspired shortly to listen to the Right Honourable Gordon Brown, our former Prime Minister, but also a passionate native of Scotland, as we all are, of course. My name's Heather McGregor, as Susie said. I am the head of the business school, and indeed at the moment the head of the School of Social Sciences at Heriot-Watt University, but I am chairing this meeting tonight in my personal capacity as someone who strongly believes that we are able to be both part of the union and very proud Scots. And I'm going to now invite Gordon to speak. After that, we will run a Q&A session, which will have to be, because of the number of people in this meeting, we will have to do a lot of that in the chat. And then after that, I will hand over to, as was mentioned by Jim, to Henry Stannard, the CEO of Our Scottish Future, who will say a few words to conclude. So without any further ado, straight from the top floor of his house in Fife, I can see Gordon with us. Gordon, it's lovely to have you with us this evening, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Heather. Perhaps I should start by welcoming you to what Boris Johnson might call a work event. So please feel free to pour your drinks. Please feel free to nibble your cheese and biscuits. There will, of course, be an inquiry formally to follow. But seriously, thank you. And I believe that 300 of us are online. Thank you for joining us for our first event of the new year. To those in 2021 who have lost loved ones and whose families have suffered because of the virus, I and all of us at Our Scottish Future want to pass on our condolences. These unthinkable losses have reinforced my, and I think all our determination to make 2022 the year when we bring the virus completely under control. And the way to do so connects directly to our message this evening. It's only through cross-border cooperation to get vaccines and treatments to all who need them across the world, and by eradicating vaccine nationalism, that we can prevent new COVID variants and put the virus truly behind us. Now, similarly, here at home, our argument at Our Scottish Future is that it is only through the Scottish Parliament making the best of cooperation across the United Kingdom, and that means recognising the mutual benefits and virtues of sharing, reciprocity and solidarity, that we can make the best of our country and make nationalism that divides the world into warring tribes a relic of the past. So this evening, I want to speak to everybody, whether they voted yes or no to independence in 2014. Who feel like Susie, we've been stuck as a country, not just for 2 years because of COVID, but for much longer because of the sterile standoff between nationalism and unionism. Scotland deserves better than this. Scotland is bigger than this. Indeed, I want to suggest that this is the moment for us to become the leaders of a more patriotic, but also more positive and more progressive future for Scotland in Britain, one that is founded on cooperation, sharing, and solidarity. Now, my colleagues in Our Scottish Future, Jim, Heather, Henry, Eddie, and Susie, will, like me, be happy to answer any questions about what we all believe are the weakness of the nationalist case, on the pound, on pensions, on passports, on public service financing, indeed on all the issues where they have no credible answers. Incoherent on quantitative easing and how we finance the recovery, incomprehensible on the border and how we prevent hard barriers to trade, confused on the EU and how you can join without agreeing to the deficit rules and the fisheries and farming regime, dangerously contradictory on defense and how you can oppose nuclear weapons but want to join a nuclear weapons alliance. But we believe it is less important to spend our time exposing the SNP and more important because Scotland deserves better than this, to spend our time explaining our positive vision of a Scotland leading in Britain, not leaving it, a vision that can not only convince our fellow Scots, but inspire them, and one that in particular, that can get through to what I call middle Scotland, to the 1.5 million men and women who hold the key to whether we will be in Britain or leave it. These are the 40% of Scots who are not ultra-nationalists and not ultra-unionists. They are the men and women who feel, let us be honest, more Scottish than British. They prefer the Scottish Parliament to the UK Parliament, most of whom have voted SNP, but they are middle Scotland, not extreme nationalist Scotland, because they've not rejected for all time all connections with the rest of Britain, and they do not feel they need to choose between Scotland and Britain. They are not our opponents. They are our potential supporters, and they have got to be won by us. But they want change, and they need reasons for supporting the United Kingdom. And what we can offer, because Scotland deserves better and can do better, is a vision that argues for, in preference to separation, the right balance between autonomy and cooperation to guarantee that everyone will be treated as first-class citizens and at the same time have the best opportunities possible within Britain. For we must not, as defenders of Britain, forget, and we must not let nationalists, the destroyers of Britain, ignore what Scotland and Scottish people agree on more than anything else. 75%, yes, 75%, 3/4 of all Scottish people in every poll we do are in favour of more cooperation, not less, with the rest of the United Kingdom. And when it comes down to the burning issues facing families today, Scottish people hit by rising poverty and excess of low-paid jobs, poor housing, declining educational standards, pressure on health and social care, rising crime, and now soon to be hit harder with higher taxes, increased energy bills and food price inflation. We can do better than simply the nationalist message that tells people they have to wait for answers until the day after independence. Scotland deserves better than this. Scotland can do better and do better now. For in addition to the Scottish Parliament, 65% of Scots want more cooperation with the rest of the United Kingdom on health to deal with problems like pandemics. 66% want more cooperation on the economy to create good jobs and end low pay. And 61% want more cooperation on climate change. So Scottish people like you and me should now lead the demand for the practical cooperation necessary to bring about change we can all get behind. Fairer, faster, safer, and less riskier change than independent. Now, change means reforms, and there will have to be improvements in the way that we run the UK to do this. But there's more to life than constitutional fights. Good jobs, better healthcare, more personalised public services, greater security, action on climate change that everyone agrees are their uppermost post-pandemic, post-austerity, post-Brexit priorities can be delivered better by extending cooperation and mobilising all the resources of the United Kingdom instead of years of conflict. Here is the choice for the future. When it comes to industry and jobs, Scotland is a power in renewables, in wind and wave power, and in hydrogen. But Scotland is bigger than even this. And as climate change and pandemics prove every day, it makes sense in a world that is interconnected, economically integrated and interdependent, and where prosperity to be sustained has to be shared, for us to work with our neighbours using all the resources of the United Kingdom to secure the investment that can make us an energy superpower with the good paying Scottish jobs that will flow from it. The same applies in IT, AI, technology. If instead of leaving the UK currency union, the UK single market and the UK customs union, we can draw on and deploy all the resources of the UK, we can be recognised worldwide and internationally competitive as a global superpower in science and engineering, just as we were a century ago. Were we to break away from the UK health service, UK scientific research and the UK welfare state, we could at best be a power in modern medicine at home. But again, Scotland is bigger than this. Pursuing the policy of intensifying cooperation across the UK and putting all its resources to work mean we can be a superpower, recognised across the world as a world leader for our medical innovation and be a huge job creator for the Scottish people. So going it alone, Scotland separating off, means we can at best be a power in the land. But Scotland, again, is bigger than this. Doing things cooperatively together and using all the UK's resources means we can be a full employment economic superpower. And this is a more expansive, more ambitious, more inspiring vision of what Scotland can achieve. And so we should lead the cause of cooperation and the cause to design a new Britain with a more flexible constitution, with a duty of cooperation at its heart, a remit to ensure an equality of respect for each of us in whatever country we live, with no one ever again treated as second-class citizens. And here we have allies in England and Wales who also want this to happen. For the Britain that most of us feel most at home in and can identify with is not the insular Britain of Johnson and Farage, but the bigger Britain of Marcus Rashford, David Attenborough, Raheem Sterling, Emma Raducanu, yes, of Andy Burnham and Mark Drakeford too, who like us believe in sharing across the United Kingdom. And so we should be thinking how here from Scotland, we can help shape a modern Britain, less centralized around Whitehall, more inclusive in a way all nations and regions of the United Kingdom can feel comfortable with an elected second chamber of the nations and regions, a UK-wide council of the nations and regions chaired by the Prime Minister, but where everybody's voice is heard, making the unfinished business of devolution less about powers here and there and more about cooperative working relationships. The creation, in fact, of a new Britain to deliver what cannot be achieved by Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and even England alone, the pooling and sharing of resources across the country that guarantees equal opportunities for each of us based on equal responsibilities accepted by all of us. So I want 2022 to be the year when we talk of the potential of Scotland and offer a plan for the future of Scotland and Britain in a post-nationalist world. For you know, there is a more fundamental set of beliefs that can unite us. Yes, Scotland's a great country of great people with boundless potential. Yes, we're proud of our distinctive culture and national identity. But we must also proudly state that part of that culture and our history and what makes us who we are is that for 3 centuries, we've not just sought national autonomy in matters close to home, but also embraced and indeed often pioneered cross-border cooperation to our benefit. And we've rejected the idea of a world of peoples and countries forever in conflict with each other. Adam Smith, who wrote from my hometown Kirkcaldy, pictured the world as a series of concentric circles, circles of empathy, starting with the empathy we feel most intensely for our family, our neighborhood, and what's close to home, the inner circle, if you like. But it is also an empathy capable of extending outwards to nations, to groups of nations, and ultimately to humanity as a whole. A world where we are connected to each other and look out for each other. And that's our Scottish identity. Our values reject isolationism, selfishness, and endless conflict. And instead, we do champion what I think matters to you and me: empathy between nations, reciprocity across communities, solidarity with and towards our fellow human beings. We don't just cooperate out of need, we actually have a human need to cooperate. And so let us think of ourselves in the way George Orwell did when writing about nationalism. Not as nationalists who see life as an endless struggle between us and them, but see ourselves as patriots who love our country, and we see the benefits of cooperating with our neighbours. Let it be this New Year's resolution to create a positive, patriotic and progressive Scottish future that the vast majority of the Scottish people can believe in and can get behind. Thank you very much.
Gordon, thank you very much indeed. Please, can I ask you to stay with us and keep your camera on so that we can answer some of the questions. Now, we've got some questions in the chat that we're busy working our way through, but some of you have very conscientiously sent some of these in advance. And I will start by calling on some other people. I mean, I have to say, we have got 315 participants in this call now, so I'm hoping that some of these people are actually here. I know you want to ask a question about the kind of UK we want to be living in. Can I ask you to switch your camera on and ask the question of Gordon? This is a live experiment, Gordon, with me and in charge of 315 people. I'm really hoping Margaret is here. If not, wait, or is having trouble. Okay, I will move to my next questioner then. So Daniel Coleman, do I have you with us? Yes, yep. Marvelous. Thank you very much. I understand that you want to know how we demonstrate to other people the argument. So would you like to ask Gordon your question directly?
Yes, thank you. Excellent speech, Gordon, and thanks everyone for setting this up. And sorry to bring this back to negative arguments, but I consistently hear two main arguments from people who are pro-independence that I feel could be persuaded. So in your view, how do we demonstrate that to people the benefits of EU membership would not outweigh the costs of leaving the UK? And secondly, an argument I commonly hear is that Scotland could potentially do a Republic of Ireland, to put it slightly bluntly, and be successful outside the UK. I've got my thoughts on that, but I'd be really interested to hear yours.
So thank you very much, Daniel, for your questions. And look, I wanted us to stay part of the European Union. I will always argue for membership of the European Union as being a better option for us. And I will continue to campaign for that. But I don't think we should be blinded to the economic facts of the matter. That the nationalists and Nicola Sturgeon used to say it was a disaster for Scotland to leave the EU because 15% of our trade, I think 15% of our trade was with European Union countries. In fact, 60% of our trade is with England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So when you look at the economic disadvantages of leaving Britain compared with leaving the European Union, the problems that would arise and the loss of jobs and the threat to our national income is 4 or 5 times greater than it has been from leaving the European Union. So if 60% of our trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom, 1 million jobs are dependent on it. And you can't really compare that with the changes that I regret from leaving the European Union. So 50 billion of our trade is with England. Perhaps the biggest trade we have with the European Union is 3 billion with Germany or Netherlands. And that's the scale of the difference between the countries. So economically, it would be far more difficult to separate. If Scotland wanted to join the European Union, there would have to be a hard border, as we've found, between Scotland and England. There can be no doubt that that would mean that the 1 million jobs that depend on our links with Scotland and the rest of Britain would be affected. So while I will continue to argue the case for staying in the European Union or going back into the European Union, the economic benefits are so different. And what I think we should be arguing for is there's no reason why we shouldn't build up links with the European Union. I hope eventually we will rejoin. I don't see why the Scottish Parliament on matters of education like Erasmus shouldn't be able to link up with the Erasmus programme in Europe, which people who are not members of the European Union join. We managed to persuade the government to stay in Horizon, so our science benefited from it. I think there should be some relationship with the European Investment Bank. So I don't see this as breaking all ties with Europe, and I don't see why in the areas for which it's got some responsibility, the Scottish Parliament couldn't have direct links with the European Union. So this is not, as the Nationalists present, a yes or no question. I think we could actually build stronger links. And to be honest, we've got a lot of people to persuade, even in Scotland, about the benefits of being part of Europe, and that's what we should continue to want to do. Now, as far as Ireland's concerned, look, the truth is that I've actually been in Ireland many times, talked to people in Ireland many times. We've just got to remember that after independence, Ireland had 50 years of austerity. Ireland is a divided country. It's not a united country. And of course, Ireland's wealth in the last few years is in part what I would not want to rely on, of being a tax haven for multinational companies. So there are many things in Ireland that I really do admire, but I think you've got to reckon that there have been costs and there will continue to be costs if you can't find a cooperative relationship with the rest of your neighbours.
Gordon, thank you very much for that and very comprehensive answer. We've now managed to unmute Margaret, so that's our technical achievement of the evening. Margaret, would you like to ask Gordon your question, please?
Yes, thank you. You've actually covered one or two of the issues raised in my question in your opening remarks, Gordon. But I would like to see us with a greater alignment with the likes of Tracy Brabin, Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, Mark Drayford, and all the other leaders in England and Wales who are using the devolved powers for the benefits of the communities they serve. And I'm wondering if there's how we can go about highlighting the work that they are doing, because not a lot of people in Scotland are aware of the role of the new mayors in England and the extent of the devolved power and the benefits that are bringing. And as part of a network of devolved powers, we could be greater than the sum of our considerable parts. And I think that by highlighting that element of life in the United Kingdom might persuade some of the Scots people that would be better staying in the UK rather than tied to the gung-ho national picture that we're being presented with at the moment. So how do you think that we can align ourselves unofficially with these people in the rest of the UK at the moment to the benefit?
I think we can do it unofficially, and I think we can do it officially, because when you think of it, people say, well, we can't cooperate with England because Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. And then I say to people, look, but we can cooperate with Manchester, with Andy Burnham, with Liverpool, with Steve Rotherham, with Newcastle, with Jamie Driscoll, with Bristol, with Marvin Rees, with Tracy Brabin in Yorkshire, and with Mark Drakeford in Wales. And they want to cooperate with us. We're doing a podcast with Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham just to show what common ground exists. All are fed up with the centre. All want to see change in the way that Whitehall and Westminster treat regions and nations. All agree with the same principles. We want healthcare. We want for all. We want better jobs. We want better paying jobs. We want to deal with the law and order problems. Scottish people and people in the northeast, the northwest, and southwest, we share the same objectives. And I think you've got to think of what's been happening over the last few years. We sometimes call it tridentity. You know, I feel I'm a Fifer, I'm a Scot, and I'm British. People in Manchester feel they're Manchester, English, and British. Newcastle, Geordie, English, and British. We call it tridentity. It's only nationalists that say you've got to make a choice between being Scottish and English. You can't be both. And your local loyalties don't matter as much as your loyalties simply to a Scottish state. I think we've got to think of Britain as a union of regions and nations, far more flexibly organized than in the past, far less centralization. And then you'll find, as you've just said, Margaret, there's a great deal of common cause between all of us. So you will find we formed the thing called the Alliance for Full Employment, where all the mayors and Scottish people and Welsh people, Mark Drayford, we all work together to try to raise the issue about jobs for young people and making sure that people have proper wages for the jobs they do. And so there's already that cooperation, and we will build on it in the future.
Gordon, thank you so much for that. And now I've got a question from Beth Johnston. Beth, are you there? Are you unmuted, more to the point? And would you like to ask Gordon your question, which I understand is about drug reform?
Hi, thank you for allowing me to ask the question. Following the news that not so long ago Scotland had the highest drug mortality rate in Europe, with over 1,300 people last year dying from drug use, how do you look upon drug reform, and do you think this could be a successful vehicle for cross-border cooperation?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because every time this tragic figure of more than 1,000 deaths from drugs is published every year, and it's going up, and it's continued to go up, and Scotland has the worst rates for Europe. What happens the day of the publication of that figure is the SNP blames the Conservatives and the Conservatives blame the SNP. It becomes a battle between London and Scotland, who's to blame for this? And then the issue of drug treatment rooms, drug consumption rooms comes up, and the SNP say we don't have the powers here and they can't get them from the Home Office. Look, I'm in favour of making the powers available to the Scottish Parliament to deal with these issues. But whatever happens, you've got to cooperate on drugs, because the drug dealers don't know borders. The drugs come from all sorts of parts of the world where you need police forces to work together to control them. I mean, I'm just dealing with what's happening in Afghanistan, where there's going to be a flood of heroin coming out because it's the only industry that's actually moving in Afghanistan. So you need cooperation. Now, at Gartcosh, the Scottish Police run a centre for cooperation on a whole series of issues. And one of them is on trafficking of girls and everything else. Another is on drugs. And that is the essence of what we should be doing, cooperation between Scotland and Britain to deal with it. Instead of blaming each other, we've got human lives at stake. How awful it is to have a blame game when you should actually be dealing with the problem. And whatever happens, whatever powers each has, the borders do not matter to the drug traders. And so we've got to find a way of working together. And I think you're absolutely right with your question. What you mean is, let's get us working together so that we can deal with this terrible blight of drug deaths, which is really disfiguring our country and causing so much harm to families.
Gordon, thank you so much for that. We've now got a question from Bernard Curran. Bernard, amongst the participants, can I ask you to unmute if you can and to ask Gordon your question? This might be another technical challenge that I've...
There we go. Evening, Gordon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this session. My question is, I've got 3 children in their 20s. They hold very, very different views on the value of the union compared to myself. The stories that my parents told me of the war and the role of the labour movement in establishing the NHS and the welfare state really don't resonate with them in the same way. Deference to the state and the royal family have largely disappeared. And we have an administration in Scotland that loses no opportunity to undermine the union. So my question is, what are your thoughts as to how we can build a new connection with the union for younger people so that they see it as something to be preserved and prized?
I think this new generation actually does see the benefits of cooperation generally, and it's a far more homogeneous world. There's far more contact across borders. There's far more communication. So I think we can champion the idea of cooperation and mobility and solidarity. But if I were to give you one example, I could give you 2 and 3, but I'll give you one example of where I think all generations understand the benefits of cooperation. It is the National Health Service. Because when you ask people in Scotland about the National Health Service, just as you ask people in England, people say more than that it's the Scottish Health Service, because administratively it's devolved. People think of the National Health Service as a British institution. They think of it something that has got a similar principle applied throughout the whole of the country, that no matter where you are, no matter what your resources are, how much money or how little money you have, you've got a right to universal free healthcare. And I think the vaccination program has proved that. I mean, testing was a bit of a disaster at the start because everybody went their own way. Vaccination was cooperation that became an essential element of getting the vaccines produced and manufactured, then getting them out to people. But I think when you look at medical research, I think when you look at a whole series of issues related to health, and I'll just give one as we find at the end, that is where you make the case for cooperation and actually the benefits that all have from it. Specialist services in different parts of the country that you can draw on, whether you're Scottish, English or Welsh. And I just give this example, the blood transfusion service and the transplant service. You know, when you offer to give blood and when you are giving something for a transplant or offering that to happen, you're not in any part of the country that I know making a condition that must only go to an English person if you're English, or a Welsh person if you're Welsh, or a Scottish person if you're Scottish. It's a gift that is being made to the person who needs that most across the whole of the United Kingdom. And that shows, I think, the benefits of cooperation and actually the ideas that people still hold, that we're part of a community of nations, a family of nations, where we will help each other, and the people that are in the greatest need will get the help from whatever it comes in any part of the United Kingdom. Now, these kind of relationships would break down under independence, but these kind of relationships can actually be strengthened, and we can have a stronger healthcare system, in my view, if we actually had better cooperation than we've had during the pandemic, and recognize that the science that we need is science where Scottish universities, English universities, Welsh universities can cooperate together. So, you know, I could talk about other issues where cooperation really matters. And yes, I understand the monarchy, and yes, I understand that other institutions like the House of Commons and so on so are less popular than they were 100 years ago, 50 years ago. People are forgetting both the war and the welfare state being created. But when you think of the health service and what's happened during this pandemic, I think you could say to young people who actually travel more or want to travel more than the older generations, that this is a very good example of cooperation, solidarity, reciprocity, and people really sharing for the benefit of everyone.
Excellent. Sorry, I had muted myself then. Thank you very much. Our next question is from Graham Downey. Graham, I can see that you're unmuted. I've now managed to get ahead of myself when I'm asking these questions. So would you like please to ask your question of Gordon?
Thank you much, and thank you, Gordon, for such a inspiring talk there. It's been fantastic. I'm a Labour candidate in the West Fife Villages, not very far from you, for the council elections in May. And already you come across a lot of former Labour voters in places like Valleyfield who've switched to the SNP. What do you think they need to see from the UK to convince them that Scotland's better off as part of the Union?
I think we need to show we've got a plan for Scotland that involves Scotland doing best by cooperating and using the resources of the whole of the United Kingdom. I mean, if you take, look, we're both in Fife, and I see you've got a printer behind you, so you're already probably preparing the leaflets for the election. And my best wishes in your campaign. And West Fife is a great area, great traditions of mining and history. We need to show we've got a plan for Scotland. If you take Rosyth Dockyard, I mean, it's clear that Rosyth Dockyard depends on British contracts. If you go up to Dundee and take the video games industry, now that's a great success of Scotland, you know, from Grand Theft Auto to Minecraft to all the entrepreneurs and inventors in Dundee, but it needs the investment that comes from the whole of the United Kingdom to enable it to be a strong industry. So the universities and the colleges and the old electronics industries in Dundee that made this possible, they need investment that comes from the whole of the United Kingdom. And I just say, you know, if we're not able to use all the resources of the United Kingdom when we want to get things moving, like the IT industry, like new jobs, like new industries, like in Fife, we want to do wind power. If we can't use all the resources of the United Kingdom, then we're not going to be able to have the prosperity that we want. And so I think the key thing is saying to people, the SNP may have a plan for independence, and it's not very clear but what it is, but they have a plan that they want independence. We have a plan, we've got to say, for Scotland, for social change, economic change, for good jobs, better public services. And I think when you can show that you've got that plan for Scotland that involves cooperation with the rest of the United Kingdom, I think you can start getting your message across. But you need the local examples of what industries and what jobs can actually benefit from the cooperation that I'm talking about.
Gordon, thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite Marion Judge. I'm just checking that she's
here. I'm here.
Yes,
yep.
Excellent. So please do ask Gordon your question.
Hi Gordon, like you, I'm a Fifer, but I live in Linlithgow. Thinking about any future campaign, I agree that a strong focus on common UK values is essential, but I wonder how the leaders of our Scottish future see this focus being presented, and specifically, how do we best get that message out when we're campaigning locally? I did get very much involved in Better Together locally in 2014, and that was something I found quite difficult to do. So I'd welcome your views on that, please.
Well, Marion, thank you for the message from Linlithgow. When we look at the polling that we've done, the values that people have, the principles they hold, and the policies that are their priorities are very similar in Scotland, England, and Wales. So while the SNP want to create this argument that Scotland's so different from England that we can't really work together with them, in actual fact, when you look at what Andy Burnham's saying or what the people of Wales are saying through Mark Drakeford, it's the similar policies and values and principles that people want to pursue. And you know, when we ask people, would you think more of England? What do you think of England if England's represented by Boris Johnson? Well, Scots people say we want nothing to do with it, I'm afraid. But when you say, but if England is really what Gareth Southgate was talking about, diverse, not racist, a community spirit, strong values of equality, then people say, well, that's I can identify with, and that we want to cooperate with, and that we're happy to work together with. Just as we say we want to work with Andy Burnham and Mark Drakeford and so on and so forth, and Tracy Brabin, when people see that most people in England have the similar values to the people of Scotland, and that we can work together to make for a better country, that's when I think we start to persuade people. So the SNP's argument has always got to be, you've got to choose between being Scottish and British. And we sometimes, and I think the Better Together campaign, it ran into this difficulty in 2014 because the SNP said, well, if you're choosing, if you're not choosing independence, you're anti-Scottish, you're pro-British and anti-Scottish. And somehow that argument started to develop. If you're proud of Scotland, you've got to vote for independence, because that's the only way of reflecting the pride you have in Scotland. And I'm saying, no, I'm a proud patriot who's always been proud to say I was Scottish. I've never tried to disguise the fact that I'm a Scot who was in Westminster for Labour, but had my home in Scotland. And I think we've got to say, you don't have to make this choice. You don't have to choose between being Scottish and British. And the reason that you don't and shouldn't have to make that choice is that the values we have are similar. So if you ask people, what's your priority? It will be healthcare, good jobs, a clean environment, law and order. And these are policies that can be developed in cooperation, rather than this idea all the time that we've got to blaming someone else for when things go wrong because we can't take responsibility ourselves. I think we can get that message across, that we have similar values and there are similar priorities, but equally, when we do things differently, it's because there's a reason for doing things differently. But the worst thing we can do is refuse to cooperate, even when it's in Scotland's interest to do so.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Dan Twist if he can hear me too.
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi, Gordon. My question came from a conversation I had over Christmas with a friend. He voted yes in the 2014 referendum. And when I asked if he would consider a federal Scotland within the United Kingdom, he asked why when we are our own separate country. So what would you say to my friend in that scenario?
Well, maybe Susie wants to come in, or Jim, or others want to come in, but just remember, around the world, there are 7,000 different languages. There are 700 different ethnic communities. There are 195 countries. So around the world, it's not true that every nation has a separate state. There are many multinational arrangements. And there's no reason why we can't make it work with our nearest neighbors. And in fact, when I talk about the post-national country, post-nationalist country, I mean where you can balance the autonomy that you have through the Scottish Parliament with the cooperation you need to get things done, whether it's on climate change and so on. So there are huge advantages in being part of a multinational state. You get the resources of the whole state to cover and underpin your pensions, your healthcare and everything else. And the truth is that the history of the world is not that every nation is inevitably a state. The history of the world is that there are arrangements that suit different people at different times. If you take Switzerland, Switzerland is French and German, but they've found a way of living together over the last, 200 years. If you take Singapore, it's Chinese, Indian, it's got 4 nationalities, but they've found a way of living together. If you take America in a different context, America is many, many nationalities have come to America and they've found a way of living together. Now, I think we can find a way of living with our nearest neighbor. And it would seem to me that to return to a 19th century solution, which is every nation must become a separate state, when actually what we should be doing is saying, let's have the flexible arrangements where we can balance the autonomy that we want, which we get with the Scottish Parliament, with the cooperation we undoubtedly need, and I could go on about climate change forever, but that's a good example where pollution knows no borders. I don't think that there is an argument that says that it must always be the case that Scotland and other countries must have a completely independent state with a separate pound, separate currency union, separate currency, and separate away from the customs unions and so on that we're part of. There's no need for that, and it doesn't make sense of a modern world. We're interdependent, we're interconnected, we're integrated as an economy, And so I think that a federal arrangement or a quasi-federal arrangement or the devolved arrangements that can be expanded are perhaps a better way of managing your affairs when you need to cooperate across borders on so many different things.
Gordon, thank you for that. In the interest,
Eddie, please, I'm not. There's other people who are perhaps better able to answer some of these questions. Susie, do you want to?
Well, we're going to. There's a few things I did actually want to mention about the questions, because actually, now in the interest of time, I'm now actually going to start asking you the questions myself, having seen what people have said in the chat, and rather than asking individual people to speak. And the other thing is, I want to say to everybody that we really value all of these questions because they give us a strong indication of what your interests and concerns are. And so we are planning to answer. There's so many questions in the chat, we will not get through them. So we are planning to answer all of your questions individually from the our Scottish Future team, and we will write to you. So if you don't get them answered in this, we will write to you and answer all of your questions personally. As I said, we have much to learn from you as we have from anywhere else, and we really are interested in what you've got to say tonight. Gordon, a number of people have asked in the chat. Originally, the first question came from someone called Kevin, but there have been several other points since then, is why don't we make more of the key financial argument, which is essentially the money that Scotland spends, part of that comes from elsewhere, and we don't actually earn enough money in Scotland for the money that we spend, i.e. that we have more because we are part of the union. Why don't we make more of that?
We do talk about it, and I said at the beginning that if people had any questions about that, but the important thing I think is that people need a positive argument. It's important to tell people what's wrong, and yes, if Scotland were to be independent, we'd lose between 10 and 12 billion a year, and that's the equivalent of half the spending on the National Health Service, and that would be a huge loss of money that is not replaced by oil revenues which don't exist in any way anymore, in any long-term way. And it's not replaced by anything else that the SNP can offer. So yes, we would immediately have to cut public services. We'd immediately run up debts. If we had an independent currency, it would be devalued immediately because we've got no reserves as a result of the position of debt. All these things are true, but you know, it's really important, and I found this during 2014, during the referendum, that people have a positive argument as well. They need to know that there's a case for being part of Britain. And I think that was found during the Brexit referendum, by the way. All the negativity did not help the case for Europe. What you have to do is show that Scotland has potential. Scotland's bigger than the SNP. Scotland's bigger than the vision the SNP have, which is narrowly nationalist. Scotland can play a bigger part in the world by cooperating with other countries, but particularly cooperating throughout the United Kingdom. So I was trying to say, look, you can be a power in energy, or you can be a power in climate, or you can be a power in healthcare and all that, but you can be a superpower if you've got all the resources behind you that are available through being part of the United Kingdom. So when people are thinking of jobs for the future, I think you've got to think about how can you be internationally competitive and successful in a number of different areas. You've got to be a superpower. You can't just be a power in your own land. You've got to be a superpower able to have something that has got the investment, it's got the capabilities, the skills and the talents. And we can do that best through being part of the United Kingdom. So I'm not ignoring the arguments about you cannot fund independence in the way that the SNP say. That can be exposed. But I do want people to feel that there's a positive reason for being part of something, and that Scotland's bigger than what the SNP are presenting. Scotland can be better than what they think we are.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful. There's been quite a lot of questions also about devolution in one way, shape or form, and there's clearly a mixed view amongst our audience tonight about whether we should be giving more powers or less powers to the Scottish Parliament. What is your general view about this? Is it that we need greater devolution, or that the whole of the United Kingdom needs to be devolved in some way? I mean, what is your feeling on this? Do you think that we should be giving more powers to the Parliament here?
It's clear that centralisation has been proven to be bad for economic development and bad for the country as a whole. Over centralisation is damaging. And what you need is centres of local economic initiative and where people can make decisions closer to home. So you will see a huge catch up on this in England as the mayors and the local authorities are demanding more power there. And so they're actually on the same wavelength as us. We want less centralisation and more local autonomy. As far as the powers of the Scottish Parliament is concerned, I just would not have something like fiscal autonomy. Fiscal autonomy is a disaster for Scotland. And those people who say, give them more powers, give them fiscal autonomy and all that sort of stuff, what it means is you're no longer sharing the resources of the whole of the United Kingdom when you're dealing with healthcare or dealing with pensions or poverty. You're simply saying everything in Scotland must be paid for by taxes raised in Scotland, irrespective of how poor or rich that part of the country is. The great thing about the United Kingdom is we've been able to spread the resources across the United Kingdom and should be doing more of that to deal with poverty and inequality and unfairness in so many different areas. And you need to be able to pool and share your resources if you're going to give the most opportunity to most people in most parts of in all parts of the country, particularly those that have been left behind. So there are certain powers that people want short of independence, like fiscal autonomy, I just would not support. Now, if you want to improve the way we deal with drugs or improve the way we deal with work permits, if you want to improve the way we actually relate to Europe, then there are certain things that we can do. But those people who argue for fiscal autonomy are making a great mistake, because it ends what I think is the most important argument for the Union, that we can share resources equitably in a way that benefits particularly the communities most in need across the United Kingdom, and Scotland definitely benefits from that.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for answering.
You may want to say something about that, I don't know.
Well, again, I'm going to hand to Henry at the end, and also, as I said, we are the whole OSF team are going to dedicate the next couple of days to answering everybody's points in the chat. So, but before I hand over to Henry, though, you know, I've got a question from me, Gordon, which is that just listening to you this evening, I know that not every, although we've heard from a number of people who are Labour candidates in some cases and Labour supporters, not everybody on this call is a Labour voter, and I think one thing we can say about support for the Union is that it transcends different political parties, and I have so much admiration for the way that you have led this as a call for the betterment of Scotland rather than for any political party. Given that you're still really quite young compared to leaders, for instance, in the United States, have you thought about coming back to run as our Prime Minister again? I'd certainly quite like that.
Well, Heather, I'm certainly too young to be President of the United States of America. I'm certainly too young to be leader of the House of Representatives, and I'm certainly too young to be the next Republican candidate for the American elections, as far as I can see. But no, look, my role here is to. We've got some great young people who are working on these issues with us, and you've just had Susie make such an eloquent speech, and I just want to help. Young people younger than me to be able and be confident enough to make the case, because I do think for too long the case for the positive view of Scotland's future in the United Kingdom has gone unstated, and I do think it really is not just people like me who are not saying what my age is. It's not just people like me, but people who are a lot younger and people who've got something to offer for the long-term future. And I just want us to make that case. And I do appeal to younger people and to everybody listening to this podcast. We need your help. We cannot do this unless we have people in every community communicating a message that is positive, as well as answering all the questions that people have. And I think the danger is, as this goes on longer and longer and longer, and people say, oh well, I'm going to be Scottish, not British. I'm just going to give up on the whole thing. We've got to persuade people that this is worth fighting for, because actually cooperation and using all the resources of the United Kingdom, is the way forward for us, not just in healthcare and the environment, but in jobs and everything else. And it's also true of national security. So all these things. So I haven't answered your question directly, but no, I prefer to be helping other people to make the case.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm now going to ask Henry Stannard to speak as the Chief Executive of our Scottish Future. We're all very proud to work alongside you, Gordon, and I know I speak for everybody on this call when I thank you for giving up your time this evening to speak to us and to answer questions.
Anytime, anytime. This is such an important cause.
And Henry, would you like to now also unmute yourself, switch on your camera and address our gathering, and I will leave you to give some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Heather. And first of all, I want to say thank you very much again to Gordon for coming on this, especially when I know that the Classico started about half an hour ago, and you were not aware of that when you agreed to do it. So thank you so much for your time and your inspiration this evening. And I also want to say from all of the Scottish Future team, so Susie, me, Eddie, Ross and Tony and Jim, how grateful we are to all of you who gave up a Wednesday evening and also a chance to watch the Classico perhaps, to hear from us and to hear a bit more about our Scottish Future. I want to talk very, very briefly about what the next steps might be from here. You know, I certainly feel very inspired by the number of people who've turned up this evening, but I also feel a sense of responsibility to make sure that the energy that's in this room actually goes on and becomes something. And so, you know, if you, like me, feel inspired and like me feel that now is the time to start to do something to advance the kind of vision that Gordon has spoken about today, then really there are three things that, you know, we think can really help, and we would invite you to do with us. The three things we think are really important are, first of all, I think that in Scotland, with the binary debate as it is today, we have to show that there is a progressive, patriotic solution and a group of people who are prepared to fight for that patriotic solution and behind that. And so I'd invite you to join us, to, you know, join our WhatsApp, to follow us on social media, tell your friends about us. And then when we do events in your area, I think we've had one in Edinburgh already. We've got ones in St Andrews, in Helensburgh and Glasgow, and hopefully one in the northeast coming up very soon. Come and join us and, you know, tell us more about it. I promise those events will be a lot more interactive than listening to people on Zoom, and we're much more interested in hearing your opinions on those events than telling you more about us. I think the second thing that we need is we need more ideas. You know, I think that it's very easy for unionists to point out the failures in the SNP's thinking. I think it's harder for us, and it has been historically, to come up with new ideas for how to make Scotland better, how to make Britain better. So first of all, I'd invite you all to tell us what you thought of this evening. Email, you know, the email address you have for us, or my colleague Ross at ourscottishfuture.org. Very keen to hear any and all reflections from this evening. Ross in particular, as our community manager, would be delighted to hear from you. I'd also invite you to, if you're particularly brave or particularly interested in an area, we're looking to start some policy discussion forums around the economy, around NHS Scotland, around social justice, around climate justice. And if you're particularly interested in something, just tell us, and we'd love to invite you to get you involved in the debate around new ideas, new ways of cooperating between Scotland and the rest of the UK. Or if you've got just one idea that's just top of your mind at the moment, as I think we might have talked about before, we've got an ideas platform called Scotland Can, where we publish, you know, small, short ideas, short pieces from anyone who has them about how to make Scotland better today, using the powers that Scotland has today to show what Scotland can do today and the change that can be made today. So please get in touch about that. And then finally, we talked a lot today about how to talk to yes voters, how to persuade yes voters. And I guess our opinion on that is that you don't persuade by shouting stats at people on the internet. You don't even persuade by shouting stats at them over the dinner table, much as I've tried with some of my family. You persuade people by listening to them and by showing that there are some levels of common values with them. And I think that within this room, within this group, with Gordon's vision, we can show that to people who today might think that they would vote for independence over the status quo. And so if you're particularly keen, if you're feeling particularly brave and want to come on that journey with us as we work out how to talk to yes voters in the community, then again, email Ross, say that you're interested, and I would personally love to talk to you about how we can do that in every community in Scotland over the next year. So those are the three things, join us, tell us your thoughts, tell us your vision. And if you're feeling particularly brave, we'd love to bring you on the journey of starting to listen to and talk to people who are like us but might feel for now that independence is a better option. And if you do, I promise I will be, and all of us will be eternally grateful, and we'll really enjoy the journey together. So that's it from me. I hopefully you can get to the second half, Gordon. And I'd like to hand over to Heather and Gordon just to close the event out and closing remarks.
Well, thank you very, very much, Henry. And as Henry said, we would love to encourage you all to come and help us on our journey of listening to the people of Scotland and working out together how we are going to ensure the best way forward for our wonderful country that we're also privileged to either live in or be part of or be a national of. There are so many wonderful people in Scotland, and there's so much ahead of us, so much opportunity in the future. We're very fortunate to be led in this work and supported and encouraged by Gordon and to have his thoughts with us this evening. But as I said, we will come back to you and answer all of your questions, all of your points, and we will make sure we invite you to the next webinar that we host in due course. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope the second half goes well, Gordon.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.